Thanks so much for tuning in to the Sustainable Brown Girl YouTube channel. This show exists to provide representation for women of color within the environmental space, to share their stories, and to inspire all to be more eco-friendly every day. I'm your host, Ariel Green. This is where you can see all of the full video podcast episodes. So be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. Also, go follow us on Instagram at Sustainable Brown Girl. Enjoy! Today's featured Sustainable Brown Girl is Zahra Biabani, also known as Soulful Seeds on Instagram, where she shares weekly Earth Wins to highlight environmental good news around the world. Zahra is a recent Vanderbilt University graduate and founder of In the Loop, a clothing rental platform that makes sustainable fashion more accessible. Thank you so much for joining us today, Zahra.
Thank you for having me, Ariel.
Yay. So let's go way back to the beginning. Tell us how your sustainable journey began.
Yeah, so around 2017, when Hurricane Harvey touched down in Houston, which is where I'm from, I was kind of more on the track of working in social justice. I definitely knew about climate change and cared about it, but definitely it wasn't my central focus. And I
Mm-hmm.
definitely didn't have any idea or conceptualization about climate justice. So
Yeah.
I was working at a social services agency during the time in a gap year between college, and I saw so many people, mostly Black and brown people, who were coming in because they lost everything in Hurricane Harvey, and
Mm-hmm.
they weren't getting adequate help from the government and FEMA, and they were just left alone and with nothing. And that continued for months and months after. I mean, there are people up to 9 months after the hurricane touchdown that still didn't have a home and were staying in hotels or with family members. So I think that experience really opened up my eyes to one, the intensity, the severity, and the urgency of the climate crisis, and also its disproportionate impacts on marginalized communities. And how it really intersected with social justice, and it's not really possible to address one without addressing the other. And so after that, I went to Vanderbilt University and I studied environmental sociology and earth and environmental science. And I just felt my interest coalesce around all of those things.
Yeah.
And my blog, Soulful Seeds, which was originally about wellness and faith, kind of just became more about sustainability. And
Mm-hmm.
it has kind of more from there.
Yeah. Wow. I've heard a lot of people say that their, I guess, knowledge of like climate change happened after a natural disaster. So, yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
So, with your degree, I know that, you're also starting your own business. Like, how does that kind of fall into place?
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting landscape of being like a digital creator, educator.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And although it is to some degree definitely fulfilling, I think it's not everything that I wanted to do. I think that sometimes social media just in general can be harmful, and especially with younger generations and short form content and its virality, it's so
Mm-hmm.
easy for a lot of like important context and nuance to slip through the cracks. So I felt unsatisfied with kind of doing that on its own and wanted
Mm-hmm.
to really put into practice and pioneer something that really took the values that I espouse through that educational platform and put them into high gear and action. So, In the Loop is a rental clothing subscription service specifically for vetted, sustainable, and ethical fashion brands. And our main goal is to make sustainable and ethical fashion accessible to everyone because, again, with the younger generations, these are the people who really, really care the most, the generations that really, really care the most about aligning their values with their purchases. Or I guess aligning their purchases with their values.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate thing is that they're typically not able to do so because of financial reasons. Because of general economics and how we've been primed to accept fast fashion prices as the norm.
Mm-hmm.
um, young people can't necessarily afford a $50 shirt, even though that $50 shirt is compensating the workers for their efforts
Mm-hmm.
and also going towards research and development of more eco-friendly materials. So, anyways, long story short, we're on a mission to just make it more accessible for everyone because we think that's necessary in order for sustainable fashion to displace the hold that fast fashion has on the entire fashion industry.
Yes, yes, that's so true. Like, um, sustainable fashion is kind of expensive. It's
Yeah,
like $100 for a pair of jeans when you're used to spending like 40. That's
exactly.
a big difference. So, how is that going to work? Like how can we rent things?
Yeah, so we are launching our beta test in June, but basically there's two different options for the start, and it's you can rent on a one-time basis. So if you have a special event like a wedding, a birthday party, graduation, you can choose a piece to rent, and you can have it for 3.5 to 4 weeks, and then you
Wow.
just send it back at the end. And then there's also a rent to buy option. So at the end of the period, if you really like that item, you can purchase it. And then the subscription option is you get 3 pieces from these variety of vetted brands that you choose at your own prerogative, and 3 pieces for $70 a month.
Wow.
So we're trying. It's definitely difficult to do pricing. We understand that $70 a month is still not super accessible for like a high school student who's not making any money, and but under $25 per piece is far below what the going rate and the MSRPs are for these
Yeah.
sustainable and ethical brands. So that's kind of how the model is starting out with. But basically, when they're done renting, they send it back to us, and we clean it. And we don't use dry cleaning because that has a very large footprint and uses a bunch of chemicals that are not good for the workers who are doing the cleaning. And
Mm-hmm.
then we put it back in our warehouse, which is my garage, and then we wait for the next person to rent it out.
Wow, that's awesome.
Thanks.
That's like really exciting because we have grown up in the culture where it's like, oh, you always want to have something new, and it's not, of course, the best for the environment to always be buying new things.
Yeah,
But this way, you kind of get the satisfaction of getting something new while also having a smaller impact. So I love that.
exactly. And it's our another main goal of ours is to really uplift smaller labels and
Yes.
designers um, who are, you know, doing really innovative things. Like tons of small labels are just not even using any new fabrics. They're totally upcycling everything that they have. And it's hard for these small labels to do demand planning because they can only really produce for a certain amount of people, and they typically just have a few loyal customers. But in order to grow, they really need to be able to look at the data and see what's working, what's not, trends. And so we're providing that data to them when they're also in their next to larger brands like Girlfriend Collective that are also on our
Yeah.
website. So we're definitely trying to uplift designers, small labels who are struggling, especially post pandemic.
Right, exactly. So I know you're just kind of starting out, but can you tell us some of the brands that you're going to be offering?
Yeah, for sure. So for the beta launch, we're working with around 7 brands. So um, off the top of my head, we have Grant Boulevard.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you know? Yeah.
Yeah, she
We
was
love,
on the
oh my
podcast.
gosh. Okay. I love Kimberly.
Yeah.
So we have Grant
Yeah.
Boulevard. We have Girlfriend Collective. We have Harper Sage. We have Loti. And we have Natalia Trevino Amaro. We have a Boyish Jeans, um, and Selva Negra. Yeah.
Nice. That's so exciting. Is it easy to get brands on board with what you're doing?
Honestly, that's like definitely the easiest part. Initially, I
Wow.
have a co-founder. Her name's Megan McSherry. Um, but initially we were like had this whole pitch deck for each brand, and we thought that would be the hardest part, but it's not.
Yeah.
Not at all. It's the hardest part is
Wow.
definitely on the back end with like logistics and shipping and trying to do all
Yeah.
these things in a very earth friendly manner. But all the brands have
Yeah.
been really excited. I think it really obviously helps that we're working with values aligned brands um,
Hmm.
that want to integrate into the circular economy.
Yes. Yes. That's awesome. So, let's talk about greenwashing and the fashion industry.
Sure.
Like, I mean, I guess on a broad note, what are some things, I guess maybe when you're looking at different brands to work with, have you like been like, oh, this looks like a good brand, and then you do a little bit more digging and you're like, oh no, they're greenwashing.
Yeah, definitely. I think retros, in retrospect, I've
Hmm.
had one instance where that was like I was really excited about an initiative, but I
Yeah.
looked into it, but not with that much discretion. I kind of accepted what I saw at face value. It was with
Mm.
like a very large sportswear brand. So it was in my very early days of being in the space, and I was just like honored to get that opportunity. And I saw that they had applied and received some sort of fair, it wasn't fair trade, but it was like a fair trade knockoff accreditation. And I
Oh
was like, oh,
gosh.
that's awesome. But
Yeah.
yeah, failed to kind of do that due diligence. Um, there's definitely a fine line between I want to promote my job as an influencer is to educate and promote um, and inspire. I guess, but in terms of
Hmm.
promotion, there's a fine line between endorsing initiatives that big brands are pioneering, which it is difficult.
Hmm.
Like it's very difficult for a large conglomerate to like fully shift their business model. It's not
Right.
possible. Um,
Right.
and it is admirable when they start the process by creating a line or starting this initiative, but at the same time, like that's not truly sustainable, and I would prefer to only work with brands that at their root, at their core, are like fully founded on these values that I can get behind. But
Yeah.
unfortunately those brands typically don't have that, like a budget, because they're smaller, and so
Yeah.
there's a lot of nuances with that. I think um, my favorite brands to work with are the ones that allow me to ask questions.
Hmm.
So even if they are maybe making these broad sustainability claims and without having a business model rooted in that, if they're open to criticism and questioning, I think that's a really big sign. So I think transparency overall, because if anyone is making the claim that they're the most, like they're doing everything perfectly, like
Hmm.
it's just that's a big red flag. So I would say transparency to me is a very important kind of gateway into sustainability, that if a brand isn't transparent, then I'm just like not gonna even consider their claims.
Yes, exactly. Right. Because it's like, I mean, especially with smaller brands, sometimes maybe they haven't gotten to the point of where they can get all the certifications and
Yes.
all that. But I totally agree that by asking the questions, and they're able to give you, concrete answers, that's really important with, determining if you want to work with someone or buy from, a certain brand.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, for someone who is maybe thinking about transitioning their wardrobe to be more sustainable, do you have any tips for them?
Yeah, definitely. I would say um, the first thing is to shop what you already have. Maybe
Hmm.
start with like a Pinterest board or things that you've saved on Instagram and see what you really like. And if that, there's certainly some pieces in your wardrobe that fall under that. Um, and try to reimagine how you've previously worn them and how you can rewear them to fit with your style and how it's evolved. The second thing is shop your friends' closets. Like if you don't have things in your closets that if you have things in your closet that you don't wear, your friends definitely do as well. And
Yeah.
there's a high likelihood that your friends will like some of the things you don't wear and vice versa. So I think swapping is like a great and super fun way to spruce up your wardrobe, and
Yeah.
experiment with different styles. And then next is thrifting. I think thrifting is a really, I mean, there's so many clothes that end up in thrift stores that aren't purchased. Um,
Hmm.
80% of what is in a thrift store ends up
Wow.
not being bought.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, so the argument, I mean, I think a while ago there was a lot of debate regarding, is thrifting bad if you can afford buying new, because
Hmm.
it is a more accessible option for low income folks. I think, other than like bigger and more central pieces like winter jackets and boots and stuff like that, I think
Okay.
that on net, like thrifting is for everyone because there's such a high volume of clothes that aren't bought. So thrifting, I think, is a really fun and great way to just experiment and try to spruce things up. And I would say start
Hmm.
by thrifting more basic things that you want to
Hmm.
build your style around. And then eventually, like now, my wardrobe is probably 95% thrifted, and it's weird to realize that, but it just starts off slowly. And
Yeah.
then I guess the step after that that I would kind of see as a natural progression is find brands that are values aligned, that you really like the style of, and that you want to invest in. So whether that's saving up for a piece or asking for it for your birthday or Christmas, whatever,
Yeah.
and treat those garments like they are how much they cost, and so that they are meant to last. Um, and so I would say that's kind of my advice for building a more sustainable wardrobe that doesn't hurt your wallet.
Yes, exactly. I love the idea of making like a Pinterest board with, inspo and stuff because once you find your personal style, it makes shopping so much easier.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
hard to like walk into a thrift store when you don't even know like what you're like
Right.
it's really truly not you're not going to be successful.
Yeah, exactly. Or you buy a bunch of things and like you never wear them because it's like, oh, wait, this doesn't match anything I have in my closet.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, and that's not sustainable.
No, not at all.
All right, Zara. I want to talk next more about like your Instagram and your weekly Earth Winds. What made you start doing that series?
Yeah, so I was actually inspired by my friend Catherine Kellogg. Her Instagram uh, handle is Going Zero Waste, and
Mm-hmm.
she had a Good News Friday series, and I asked her if it would be okay if I like did the same thing but with like dancing.
Yeah.
And she was like, "Yeah, of course." So she was really generous in that. But I did it one week, and I truly didn't expect anything of it. Like I didn't think it would be a series, but people really loved it. I think I wanted to combine like just like a silly, fun dancing vibe, that
Yeah.
I saw become more and more popular kind of during the pandemic
Mm-hmm.
with these tidbits of good news. And yeah, I mean, initially I felt kind of silly doing it, but it really took off. And more than that, people's words and feedback to how it is something they look forward to every week and something that kind of sustains their activism, which is really the goal of it, is to encourage people who are already in this space, who are already either working and advocating for our planet, that their efforts are not for naught, that
Yeah.
their efforts are valued, and even though it doesn't seem like it, even though there's tons of bad news, that there are uh, monumental impacts when we organize and when we advocate and when we use our voices. So that's kind of the
Yes.
background behind that. I also realized that I myself was feeling burnt out with what I was studying and working on, and it's really easy to kind of fall into a hole of despair. And I felt myself doing that. So these videos and sourcing these tidbits of good news every week has been really helpful for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's always so uplifting to see that pop up on my feed every Friday. And I'm like, oh, yay, there's good things happening in the world.
Honestly, some weeks it's like, dang, like there's a lot of things and I can't believe these items
Yeah.
aren't talked about. And I'm really excited and very grateful for this opportunity because I got a book deal because of it, which I like would have never
Wow.
anticipated. So I'm writing a book right now
Yeah.
on climate optimism, um, systemic change, and celebrating wins around the world. So I'm highlighting communities in the global south that typically don't get a lot of attention, and how they are pioneering solutions to the climate crisis, but also in the first section of the book, unpacking a lot of the biases that we have as humans that make it more difficult for us to become optimists and more specifically climate optimists. Um, and
Mm,
so I'm really excited to just get that in people's hands because a lot of the biases that we've formed, and that we're naturally inclined towards have only been accelerated by the pandemic and by TikTok and by short form content, and by the spread of disinformation. So I'm really excited to hopefully, produce something that is a longer, more uh, what's the word of something that lives, like evergreen form of content that people
gotcha.
can actually like reference and look back
Yes.
at, that maybe doesn't sit on social media.
Yes. Yes. Wow. Is there a release date for the book?
The pre-order date is next Earth Day, so, or next Earth
Ah,
month, so 2023.
yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, how
Thank you.
exciting.
I'm really, really stoked.
Yes. So let's talk more about climate
Yeah.
optimism. Like, how do you stay motivated? What keeps you going?
Yeah. I think understanding that really at its core, there's no other option. If you care about these issues and you want to make a difference, you can't give up. Even if
Hmm.
all the signs point to doomism, which they don't,
Yeah.
which is good, um, you just can't give up. Um, and I think in terms of actual practices that have helped me do that is being really critical about the news that I follow, the media sources that I follow on social media as well.
Hmm.
Um, the kind of research holes I allow myself to go into, um,
Hmm.
and also sourcing out not only positive news, but like the stories of people who have really truly no other choice but to adapt and find solutions, when governments fail to do so, that can inspire. So again, the people predominantly in the global south who are just oftentimes left out of conversations surrounding climate solutions. Um,
Hmm.
and the in the West, we tend to prioritize these like sexy climate tech, carbon capture, SpaceX kind of solutions,
Hmm.
without acknowledging like people who have had to build levees around their house, because they constantly get flooded, or have created a community garden for their community to increase access to food sovereignty, right? We don't tend to glorify those smaller scale localized examples that have so much more power in building
Hmm.
resiliency than, in my opinion, does like a multi-billion dollar investment that like we read
Yeah.
about in Washington Post.
Right, right, exactly. That's kind of my goal with this
Yeah.
podcast is to highlight, women of color who are doing things like in their own way to make a difference.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's so
I
important
love
to
that.
spread that news.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah. So, when let's see, what was my next question? It totally left me.
It happens.
um, let's see. Wow. So when, oh yeah, no, this was one of my questions. How do you find good news, good climate news? Because it seems like all of the headlines typically are, not so good.
Mhm. Yeah, so I just on Google you can actually have news alerts, and so you can enter keywords that you want to be notified about in your inbox
Mm,
whenever they're used in an article. So that's one thing that I do, um, and it just delivers news to my inbox. Now a lot of the I have to you know shuffle through, and not everything
yeah.
matches up, but
Yeah.
that's kind of
Right.
an easier way. To get stuff directly to you. And then I literally just every week just search for the latest environmental news. And there is always at least a few stories that are more positive than the ones that we hear about. So
Right.
just understanding that it exists, but because of the negativity bias, which I write about, which has long been known about, but it's basically our tendency to prioritize negative information as more important, more truthful. There's studies shown that humans just like see when a fact is framed in a negative way versus a positive way. Say like 60% of, this is a made up fact, but say a fact was like 60% of women are satisfied in their jobs,
Hmm.
versus 40% of women are dissatisfied in their jobs. That
Yes.
fact is seen as or perceived by humans as more truthful than the 60%, which is so interesting.
Mm,
So,
yeah.
yeah, I think, did that answer your question?
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's good. So you just, try to put a positive spin on it pretty much.
Yeah, basically, because the information is out there,
Yeah.
it's just
Right.
doesn't grab as many eyes.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it seems like people kind of want to see bad news, like, it kind of validates their thought pattern, it's like, oh,
Exactly.
it's all bad. Yeah.
Exactly. I also think, and this is like a hard pill to swallow, but I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people, um, who even they believe that they have a duty to do something for the environment, to protect the environment, and they have these values, it's easier to think that like change isn't possible or on the horizon because it absolves them of their responsibility in like fighting towards a change, or saying like
Yeah.
I'm just one person. um, but all change starts with one person, and
Yeah.
so I think there's a ton of just like psychological components that make optimism more difficult, especially with like something as large and obtuse as our planet's like vitality.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So true. Okay, my last question, like on this topic, is like when we see the IPCC reports and stuff like that, it seemed to me like it was kind of negative. I mean, it seems like oftentimes like climate change reports and different conferences always kind of come back negative. So I mean, we know that it's difficult, and there's going to be a lot of change that has to come in order for us to fight climate change. But when you see like negative reports like that, does it give you, doom and gloom? Are you still able to be positive even after seeing that? Like, do you put your own positive spin on it?
Yeah, I think that's an important caveat that I failed to mention, is that like these reports are by and large for policymakers and
Yeah.
people who have neglected to act. Um, and I think the unfortunate uh, impact of these reports coming out is that, obviously media picks it up, and then citizens interpret this information.
Hmm.
My content is definitely like this framework of climate optimism. Like, I don't want any policymaker to listen to it. Like, I
Yeah,
want this
right.
to be for like people who are having existential crises, like
Mm-hmm.
who are 14 years old and don't know if they like should have a family, or any
Yeah.
person who feels the weight of the world on their shoulders, not for like
Yeah.
politicians who have failed to act or failed to listen to the evidence for years and decades. I think, yeah, that's a very important distinction of like this climate optimism, not for them. Like they need to be looking
Yes.
at these like hard facts that are very grim and that predict that if we don't act now, if we don't half our emissions by 2030, we will exceed the 1.5 degrees limit above pre-industrial
Mm-hmm.
times.
Mm-hmm.
And the consequences of that are abundant in a variety of spheres, whether it's economic or health. Um, so I think that's definitely something important. So I definitely read each kind of report that comes out with one eye geared towards like, what is this saying to policymakers, to people in power? What is this saying to consumers, citizens, just regular people?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So I often hear people say, like, oh, me just using a water bottle or thrifting isn't going to make a difference. What do you say to people like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I, I mean, it's if you are looking at that in an absolutist frame, it's not going to make a difference if
Mm,
you one day get a plastic water bottle because you forgot your water bottle at home. But it's about like your impact. So that's why I don't love the term influencers, because like really truly everyone has an influence.
yes.
And whether it's your family, your friends, people that just you see on the street, um, there is weight and gravity in your responsibility to uh, leverage that influence for
Mm-hmm.
good. So just as
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to do anything to the planet when if you forgot your water bottle at home, um, if you constantly tell people about like, oh, this is how much plastic waste is generated in, you know, a year. There's more plastic projected to be in the sea by 2050 than fish. Like that's what gets people thinking.
Yes.
So I think it's actions paired with knowledge
Mm-hmm.
that really become impactful. Because if you have the knowledge and information and you're just spewing it, people are gonna be like, okay, well, what are you doing about it, right? Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and if you just do the action without knowing the facts, people are going to be like, what weight does this really have? So I think both are really important, but also the reminder that like as one person, you can only change the world with other people. So
Yes.
getting other people into this movement is in my opinion, is the primary, should be the primary kind of goal rather than taking your water bottle to work every day.
Yes, 100% agree. Because, not everyone is looking at the news and like thinking about things from a climate perspective or like a health of the planet perspective. And I think that being an example in your own community, like with your friends and your family and stuff, that has way more of an impact than carrying your water bottle because you're getting more people on board. Like you can only do so much as yourself, but when you get other people involved, that makes so much more of an impact. So,
Yes,
totally agree.
absolutely.
Yes. All right, Zara. It's been amazing having you on today.
Thank you so much for having me, Ariel.
Yes, please tell everyone where they can find you online and all the awesome things you're doing.
Yes, absolutely. Really appreciate what you're doing with your platform in this podcast and
Thank
uplifting
you.
women of color in this space. So I think that's really admirable. But
Thank you.
I am on Instagram and TikTok as Soulful Seeds, and my website is soulfulseedsblog.com. And that's kind of where I live on the internet.
Yes, and then also In the Loop coming
Yes.
soon.
Yes,
Yep.
it's Rent in the Loop on Instagram, and you can sign up for our email list on our website, which is rentintheloop.com.
Yes, and then we'll be looking for your book
Thank
next
you.
Earth Month. I'm so excited for you.
I am so excited. Thank you so much.
Yay. And then our last question is, what does being a sustainable brown girl mean to you?
Yes, I love that. And love how you close with that. So, to me, being a sustainable brown girl means using my identity and exploring my identity culturally, religiously, everything, and how it has brought me to care about the planet. So, from as early as I can remember, my mom was recycling, like not recycling, but upcycling plastic
Mm-hmm.
straws and containers that we had from takeout. And I would bring them to school for lunch and I would be embarrassed because I was like, people would look at me and make comments, but that's what it meant for her to be, a sustainable brown girl. That's how she was raised. And
Yeah.
even though she didn't actively know about the facts of climate change, she was taught to use what was already in her hands. So to me, it's just using my identities to explore how I am, where I'm at, and why I'm fighting for what I'm fighting for.
Yes, I love that. So amazing.
Thank you, Ariel.
Thanks again, Zara, for coming on. It's been such a pleasure talking with
You
you.
as
And
well,
please,
truly.
thank you. Yes, please go follow Zara if you aren't for whatever crazy reason. But yes, you will not be disappointed. Thanks again.
Of course. Thank you.
Don't leave just yet. Click here to hear from another sustainable brown girl, or click here to watch the full playlist from this season.